Imagine walking down a hallway. The lights above you flicker, the stench of mildew and rust thick in the air. Suddenly you hear it. A scream that isn't quite human, echoing from a room that hasn't been occupied in over 50 years. Welcome to Texas, where the hospitals never fully closed their doors, and the patients, some never left. Our journey begins in the small town of Terrell, about 30 miles east of Dallas. A town that looks quiet on the surface, but hiding here is a building that has witnessed more suffering than most cemeteries. Terrell State Hospital. It opened its doors in 1885. Back then, it wasn't a place of healing. It was a place to hide away the forgotten, the insane, the disturbed, and those society simply didn't want to deal with. The sprawling campus was massive, with red brick Victorian buildings and looming towers that cast shadows across the grounds. Inside, long hallways stretched into darkness, doors leading to rooms where countless patients were locked away. But this wasn't just a hospital, it became a warehouse of human misery. Reports from the early 1900s described conditions that were horrific. Patients chained to their beds, cries echoing through the night as overworked staff tried to control the uncontrollable. Some were subjected to experimental treatments, ice baths, insulin shock therapy, and later, electroshock so powerful it left people unable to remember their own names. And then, there were the deaths. So many deaths. The hospital had its own cemetery, rows upon rows of unmarked graves where patients were buried with nothing but a number. No names, no families, just forgotten. But death, it seems, was not the end at Terrell. Visitors, staff, even ghost hunters who dared to step inside all report the same thing. This hospital is alive with something else. The most infamous spirit is a little girl. Some say she was the daughter of a nurse who lived on the grounds. Others believe she was a patient who died in one of the children's wards. What's certain is this: people hear her. A child's laughter, echoing down empty corridors, sometimes playful, sometimes mocking. One paranormal team described setting up their cameras in a darkened hall when they heard the sound of tiny footsteps, running, stopping, then running again. When they shined their lights, the hallway was empty, but in the audio recording, a girl's voice whispered, "Play with me." But she is not the only spirit. Former employees claim they've seen shadowy figures in the old maximum security ward, where the most violent patients were kept. One night, a nurse on shift reported seeing a man standing at the end of the hall, his hospital gown torn, his head tilted unnaturally to one side. She blinked. He vanished. It's done. But when she walked toward where he'd been standing, the faint smell of burning flesh filled the air. And then, the lights above her flickered and went out. Others speak of hearing screams that rise up from the basement, where it's rumored patients were once restrained and left for days. Some even claim to have captured photographs, faces pressed against old, dusty windows, watching from rooms that have been locked for decades. Imagine it for a moment. You're walking those halls. Your flashlight beam catches peeling paint, rusted bed frames, the faint outline of words scratched into the walls by desperate hands. The air grows colder. You hear the sound of metal dragging against the floor. Something brushes past you, though the hallway is empty. And then, a scream so loud, so sudden it rattles the glass. But when you turn to run, the hallway is longer than before, stretching on, and on, and on. That's the terror of Terrell State Hospital. And as terrifying as this asylum is, it's not the only one in Texas hiding restless spirits. Because deeper in the heart of the state lies a hospital so infamous, locals still refuse to drive past it after dark. And that's where we're going next. We leave the crumbling halls of Terrell behind, but Texas still has darker places waiting for us. Places where the walls are soaked with suffering, where prayers were whispered, but rarely answered. Our next stop is Yorktown Memorial Hospital, Yorktown, Texas, a quiet rural town with a population barely over 2,000. But on the edge of this sleepy community sits a hulking stone structure that once promised hope. Built in 1950 by the Felician Sisters of the Roman Catholic Church, Yorktown Memorial Hospital was dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Its mission was noble: to serve the sick, the poor, and the desperate. For decades, patients poured through its heavy double doors. Some came seeking healing, others redemption, but many never made it out alive. By the 1980s, the hospital had developed a reputation, not just for care, but for death. Drug addicts came here for treatment, some overdosing in the very rooms where they sought help. Victims of violent accidents were rushed inside, many taking their last breaths beneath the dim fluorescent lights. In 1988, after nearly 40 years of service, Yorktown Memorial Hospital closed, but death never left. The number of lives lost within Yorktown is staggering, thousands of souls claimed within its walls, some from illness, some from tragic mistakes, and some, perhaps, from something darker. Locals whisper of botched surgeries, of patients who cried out in agony before slipping into silence, of nurses who worked tirelessly, only to end up patients themselves. And in the decades since, Yorktown has transformed into something else entirely, a magnet for the paranormal. Step inside today, and it feels less like a hospital and more like a tomb. Long corridors stretch into darkness. Rust stains the tile floors. Old wheelchairs sit abandoned, waiting for patients who will never return. And then, there are the spirits. Visitors consistently report seeing shadowy figures darting through the halls, apparitions of nuns still walking their endless rounds, their habits flowing as they vanish into the walls. Some claim the sisters are still tending to the lost souls trapped here. Others insist they're guarding something. But one presence overshadows them all, the spirit of a man with glowing red eyes. Witnesses describe him lurking in the basement, where the air reeks of mold and rot. When you meet his gaze, they say, you feel frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, until those eyes fade back into the darkness. Paranormal investigators who explore Yorktown rarely leave empty-handed. One team, deep in the ICU, captured a voice on their recorder, clear, male, angry. It whispered, "Get out." But they stayed. Minutes later, one investigator felt a searing pain across his chest. When he lifted his shirt, fresh, bloody scratches appeared, 3 claw marks dragging from shoulder to waist. There was no one near him, no explanation, only the icy certainty that something wanted them gone. The chapel, once a place of healing and prayer, carries its own lingering presence. Visitors have heard hymns echoing in the silence, voices lifted in worship, though the pews remain empty. Some see figures kneeling at the altar, only for them to vanish in the blink of an eye. But the children's ward may be the most unsettling. Laughter floats through the corridors, small and playful. Rubber balls roll across the floor when no one is there to kick them. One group placed a teddy bear in the center of the hallway, cameras rolling. Minutes later, the bear flew against the wall with violent force. No drafts, no humans, just unseen hands at play. Imagine yourself there. The air is heavy with mildew clinging to your lungs. Your flashlight shakes as you step deeper into the blackened corridor. Ahead, footsteps echo, slow, deliberate, growing louder. You shine your light. But the hall is empty. Then, from behind you, a voice whispers in a guttural growl, "Leave now." You turn, heart hammering, but the hallway yawns back at you. Rows of empty rooms, their doors hanging open like mouths frozen in mid-scream. And in that instant, you realize you are not alone in Yorktown Memorial Hospital. Yorktown is a place where the dead still speak. But it isn't the only Texas hospital where the patients never truly left. Because farther west, across endless miles of desolate plains, waits another facility. One with a history of madness, murder, and spirits so violent, even seasoned investigators hesitate to enter. And that is where we are going next. Texas has many places that hold the echoes of suffering, but few compare to the vast and shadowed halls of San Antonio State Hospital. It opened its doors in 1892, originally known as the Southwestern Insane Asylum. At first, it was a vision of progress, an enormous psychiatric facility meant to bring order and care to those suffering from mental illness. The campus stretched across hundreds of acres, its red brick buildings rising like a fortress on the edge of the city. But time has a way of turning noble intentions into nightmares. Inside, the asylum quickly became overcrowded. By the early 1900s, thousands of patients filled its wards. Doctors, overwhelmed, resorted to desperate measures: electroshock therapy, isolation cells, and in some cases, lobotomies performed on patients who could no longer resist. Families often abandoned their relatives here, never visiting again. Once you were admitted, the chances of ever leaving were slim. And with each passing year, more stories of cruelty and despair seeped into the foundation of San Antonio State Hospital. The Asylums cemetery still lies on the property, its rows marked with simple headstones, many etched only with numbers. Hundreds of lives ended here, many forgotten, many unnamed, but not all of them rested quietly. For decades, whispers have circulated about what lingers inside the walls. Even current employees who work in the newer wings tell stories about the old buildings on campus. They describe a place where the past bleeds into the present. Some say they hear footsteps echoing down the deserted corridors. Others report screams cutting through the night, agonized, desperate cries that seem to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then there are the shadows. Dark shapes dart across the halls, moving faster than the human eye can follow. They appear in doorways, vanish into walls, and hover at the ends of long corridors, waiting. One of the most disturbing stories comes from the old maximum security ward, where the most violent patients were once kept. A night watchman making his rounds claimed he heard banging on the doors, heavy, rhythmic pounding, as if fists were slamming against metal, but every room was empty. As he moved farther into the hall, he swore he saw hands, pale, skeletal hands, reaching out from beneath the doors, clawing at the floor, grasping for something, anything. When he shined his flashlight, the hands disappeared, but the pounding continued, louder and louder, until he fled the building. Another chilling encounter was reported by a nurse walking to her car late one night. She passed by one of the older wings, long abandoned, its windows shattered and dark. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a figure standing in one of the rooms, a tall man in a hospital gown, head bowed, arms hanging stiffly at his sides. She froze, staring. The man slowly lifted his head. His face was twisted, mouth open in a silent scream. And then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The nurse refused to take that route again. But perhaps the most frightening phenomenon of all comes from the tunnels beneath the hospital. Like many old asylums, San Antonio State Hospital had underground passageways connecting its buildings. They were used to move patients, supplies, even the dead. Today the tunnels are sealed off, but those who have dared to sneak inside describe an atmosphere thick with dread. One group of explorers claimed that as they walked deeper, the air grew suffocating, as if pressing against their lungs. The walls seemed to close in. And then, from the darkness ahead, came the sound of chains dragging across the floor. When their flashlight beams caught the tunnel wall, they saw scratches gouged deep into the stone, as if someone or something had tried to claw its way out. That was enough. They turned and ran, but even as they escaped, they swore they heard footsteps pounding after them, following until they reached the surface. Imagine standing in those deserted wards. The walls are cracked and peeling, paint curling like dead skin. The air reeks of mildew and rot. The silence is broken only by the sound of your own breathing. And then faintly, you hear it, a voice calling your name. Soft at first, almost kind. But the longer you stay, the louder it becomes, until it's screaming in your ear, drowning out every thought, demanding you to leave. Some say it's the spirits of the patients, their pain still echoing through the halls. Others believe the asylum itself has absorbed their torment and now lashes out at anyone who dares to enter. Either way, San Antonio State Hospital is not a place to wander after dark. San Antonio's asylum is proof that even in the heart of a bustling city, the shadows of the past never truly fade. But farther north, tucked among quiet streets, waits another institution. Smaller in size, but with stories so disturbing, they linger like a curse. And that is where our journey takes us next. In the heart of Dallas, where skyscrapers now pierce the sky and highways roar with traffic, stands a hospital that has seen more death than life. A place where the walls still remember the agony of the sick, the screams of the dying, and the hopelessness of those who knew they would never leave. This is Old Parkland Hospital. The story begins in 1894, when Parkland was first established as a public hospital for the city of Dallas. At the time, Dallas was growing fast, and the new facility promised modern care. But like so many hospitals of its era, its resources were strained almost immediately. Patients crowded into wards, and the staff struggled to keep up with the relentless flow of illness, injury, and death. Over the years, Parkland became infamous. It saw epidemics sweep through its halls: tuberculosis, influenza, smallpox. It received the broken bodies of workers injured in rail accidents, fires, and shootings. Its morgue was constantly full, and bodies sometimes waited days before burial. And with death came a heavy shadow. The new Parkland Hospital complex eventually opened in the 1950s, leaving the old building to decay. But the spirits of the past never checked out. The hauntings at Old Parkland are some of the most chilling in Dallas. Former employees, construction workers, and even security guards describe the same unnerving encounters. They hear moans echoing down the empty corridors, as if patients are still crying out for help. Doors slam without warning. Elevators move between floors on their own, long after the power to the old systems was cut. And then there are the apparitions. Figures in hospital gowns wandering the halls. Nurses standing silently in doorways before vanishing into thin air. A man wheeled past in a gurney, his face pale and lifeless, gone by the time you turn your head. But the most infamous spirit of Old Parkland is said to haunt the surgical ward. One chilling story tells of a night security guard making his rounds through the abandoned upper floors. As he passed the old operating theaters, he noticed a strange glow under one of the doors. Thinking perhaps a light had been left on, he pushed it open. Inside, the room was empty, but the glow remained, a cold, bluish light hanging in the air above the rusted surgical table. And then, as he stepped closer, he heard it: the metallic clink of instruments, the shuffle of unseen feet, and a low moan, drawn out, filled with unbearable pain. The guard froze. The table before him shook violently, as if something unseen writhed upon it. And then, silence. The light went out. The room was empty again. He never finished his shift. Another disturbing report comes from the old children's ward. Workers restoring parts of the building in the 1990s claimed they heard laughter drifting through the halls, children laughing, singing, even whispering. One man swore he saw a small boy peeking from around a corner, pale skin, hollow eyes. The boy giggled and ran down the hall. When the man followed, he found nothing but a dead end. Later that same night, he returned to the spot, and there, in the dust on the floor, were small footprints leading into the wall itself. The morgue may be the darkest corner of Old Parkland. Here, workers report feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, as though something unseen is watching them. The temperature plummets, their breath fogs in the air, and strange shadows move along the walls. One chilling account describes a worker carrying tools through the morgue when he felt icy fingers brush against his neck. He spun around. No one was there. But in the reflection of a steel cabinet, he saw a figure standing behind him. A man, gaunt and skeletal, his eyes nothing but hollow sockets. When he turned again, the figure was gone. But the handprint, cold, damp, and unmistakably human, remained on the back of his neck. Imagine stepping into Old Parkland at night. The windows are shattered, letting in only slivers of moonlight. The air reeks of dust, rust, and old disinfectant. Every footstep echoes too loudly, bouncing down corridors that stretch farther than they should. And then, from behind you, the sound of wheels squealing. An old gurney being pushed down the hall. You turn, but the hallway is empty. Still, the squealing grows louder, closer, until it feels like it's right beside you. But there is nothing there. Nothing but the suffocating sense that you are being surrounded by the dead. Old Parkland Hospital is a reminder that even in a bustling city, the echoes of suffering never truly fade. The building has been restored and repurposed in modern years, its exterior polished and new. But behind those walls, the stories remain, the ghosts remain, and if you listen closely enough, late at night, you might still hear the cries of the forgotten patients who never made it out alive. Dallas holds its ghosts tightly, but farther north in Texas lies another hospital, one where the line between history and horror blurs completely, a place so notorious, ghost hunters call it one of the most active sites in the entire state, and that is where we are going next. Imagine driving into the small town of Mineral Wells, Texas. It's quiet. Dust blows across the street. But towering above everything else is a massive stone giant, a 14-story colossus rising from the earth like a forgotten castle. This is the Baker Hotel. From a distance it looks majestic, almost regal. But as you draw closer, the cracks show. Windows are shattered, balconies sag under the weight of time. And standing in its shadow you feel something else, something heavy. Like the air itself is pressing against your chest, warning you not to go inside. The Baker was never meant to be terrifying. When it opened in 1929, it was a dream, an opulent resort, a beacon of wealth and luxury in a small Texas town. Built by businessman Theodore Baker, it promised healing and high society all in one. Why here? Because Mineral Wells was famous for its water. The locals swore by it, claiming the mineral-rich springs could cure everything: arthritis, stomach troubles, even depression. Word spread fast. Soon, thousands flocked to the town, desperate for relief that modern medicine could not give them. And where there is desperation, there is money. The Baker opened with over 400 rooms, 2 ballrooms, a grand lobby, a spa, even a rooftop swimming pool. Movie stars, oil tycoons, and politicians came through its doors. The rich soaked in baths, sipping cocktails while doctors prescribed mineral treatments. It was part hospital, part playground for the elite. But for every glamorous guest, there were dozens of sickly visitors. They arrived in wheelchairs, limping with canes, coughing blood into handkerchiefs. They checked in hoping for salvation. Some got better, many did not. And those who died here, well, the Baker did not advertise that. Staff moved the bodies discreetly, slipping them out side doors in the night. But the walls knew, the floors knew, and it seems the spirits of the dead never left. As the decades passed, the hotel's golden age crumbled. By the 1950s and 60s, Mineral Wells had faded. The wealthy stopped coming. The Baker became more of a sanatorium than a resort. Its rooms filled with the sick, the poor, the desperate once again. And with that shift, the hauntings grew stronger. Workers began whispering of strange footsteps echoing in the empty halls. Guests spoke of shadows flitting past their mirrors, of doors that opened on their own, of sudden icy drafts on hot Texas nights. And always, the feeling of being watched. It's as if the Baker, from the very beginning, absorbed the sorrow of those who sought healing within its walls. It fed on their desperation, their pain, their deaths. And now, the building itself seems alive. The grandeur is gone. The beauty has rotted, but the spirits remain. And in the heart of the Baker's ruins waits a ghost unlike any other, the Lady in White. She is the Baker Hotel's most infamous spirit, the one every ghost hunter whispers about. The one guests still claim to see gliding through the shadows of the ruined halls. The Lady in White. Her story begins in whispers of betrayal. They say she was the mistress of the hotel's owner. Beautiful, elegant, adored by the wealthy men who passed through the Baker's doors. For a time, she lived in the penthouse suite, looking out over Mineral Wells with an air of untouchable grace. But her story did not end with luxury. It ended with heartbreak. One version says her lover cast her aside, leaving her abandoned in the hotel that had once been her palace. Another says she grew weary of hiding, of living in secrecy and shame. Whatever the truth, the ending is always the same. She threw herself from the top of the building. Her body was broken on the ground below, but her soul never left. Since that day, the Lady in White has been seen countless times. Visitors climbing the grand staircase report the sudden scent of lavender perfume, sweet, floral, unmistakable, yet no one is near. Workers in the penthouse hear the soft click of high heels pacing back and forth across the dusty floor, always stopping at the balcony where she met her fate. Some have seen her with their own eyes, a pale figure draped in white standing at the end of a corridor. Her face is blurred, as though the hotel itself refuses to let you see it clearly. She does not move. She only stares. And when you blink, she's gone. One chilling encounter comes from a group of urban explorers who broke into the Baker in the late 1990s. As they made their way up to the 12th floor, One of them swore he saw a woman watching from the far end of the hall. She was standing perfectly still, her dress glowing faintly in the dim moonlight that spilled through a broken window. The group froze, whispering to one another. Thinking she was another explorer, they called out. But she didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. Then, without warning, the figure drifted backward, into the wall itself. The explorers fled, swearing they would never return. But the lady in white isn't just a silent phantom. Sometimes she makes her presence violently clear. In the penthouse suite, investigators have captured recordings of a woman's sobs echoing in the darkness. Others claim to feel an icy hand brush their arm, as though she is begging not to be left alone. And there are darker stories still. One man reported standing on the balcony late at night when he felt an overwhelming urge to jump, like invisible hands were pulling him forward, whispering for him to follow her. He staggered back just in time, shaking and pale, convinced she had tried to claim him as her companion. The lady in white is no ordinary ghost. She is the baker's soul, bound to the building, replaying her sorrow night after night. And if you smell lavender while wandering those crumbling halls, beware. It means she is close, watching, waiting. The lady in white may be the baker's most famous ghost, but she is far from alone. The building is crowded with spirits, each one leaving behind a fragment of sorrow, fear, or rage. Step into the basement first. The air here is thick, damp, almost impossible to breathe. This was once the spa, where guests soaked in tubs filled with the mineral waters that gave Mineral Wells its reputation. In the 1930s, doctors prescribed treatments down here, promising that the baths would flush away pain and disease. But listen closely, and you'll hear something else. The sound of water dripping, though the pipes have long been dry. The faint murmur of voices whispering in the dark, just beyond the reach of your flashlight. And sometimes, a sudden splash, as if someone unseen has slipped into one of the long-drained pools. Workers who ventured into the basement reported icy hands brushing against their arms, tugging at their clothes, as though unseen patients were reaching out for help. Some fled mid-shift, refusing to return. They said the walls seemed alive, humming with energy. Watching. Climb the stairs, and you enter the 7th floor. This level was notorious even in the hotel's golden age. It was here that many of the sick stayed, wheeled in by nurses, desperate to be cured by the mineral waters. But the 7th floor has grown darker with time. Explorers tell of shadows sliding beneath closed doors, of faint coughing echoing through empty rooms. One man even swore he heard the rattle of a hospital gurney rolling down the hall, though the floor was littered with broken plaster and debris. And then, there are the children. The baker had its share of young patients, families who brought sick sons and daughters hoping the water might give them a future. Many never left. Near the indoor pool, long since drained and coated in dust, visitors report the sound of laughter. Light, playful, echoing across the tiles. Some hear splashing, the faint squeak of a diving board. One investigator described watching in horror as wet footprints began to appear on the dry floor, tiny, bare footprints, one after another, leading toward the edge of the empty pool. But when he looked inside, there was nothing. Only the black void of cracked concrete, and the laughter stopped. But not every spirit in the baker is playful. Some are violent. Ghost hunters in the early 2000s set up equipment on the 12th floor. Almost immediately, their meters spiked. The air turned icy cold. One of them asked, "Is anyone here?" The reply came as a low growl captured on tape. "Get out." Moments later, one of the team members clutched his stomach, crying out in pain. Lifting his shirt, he revealed 3 long scratches carved across his skin. Raw, red, bleeding. There had been no one near him. It was as if something in the hotel had lashed out, furious at their intrusion. The baker's ruins are a maze of these stories. Soft whispers in the stairwell, a piano playing by itself in the ballroom, shadows that move when you stand perfectly still. The building is a hive of spirits, restless, angry, sorrowful, each tied to the endless cycle of suffering that began when the first desperate guest checked in, praying the waters would save them. But some say the baker isn't just haunted by ghosts. They say the hotel itself is alive, and what it wants is you. Imagine stepping into the Baker Hotel after midnight. The town outside is silent, asleep, but inside this crumbling tower, time has stopped. The air is heavy, almost wet, filled with the smell of dust, rust, and something sweeter, like old perfume, faint and fleeting. The moon spills through broken windows, carving pale rectangles across cracked tiles. Every sound echoes too loudly. The crunch of your footsteps, the low groan of the wind squeezing through shattered glass. You move deeper, flashlight in hand, and the silence becomes unbearable. That's when you hear it, faint music drifting through the air. A waltz, soft, elegant. You follow it to the grand ballroom. The chandeliers are shattered, the dance floor coated in decades of dust. But as the music swells, you see movement. Couples gliding across the floor, faces blurred, their bodies faintly glowing. For one terrifying moment, the Baker lives again. The wealthy, the sick, the desperate, all dancing together in eternal silence. Then the vision collapses. The ballroom is empty once more. The music is gone. Only the dust remains. You flee to the stairwell, but the shadows seem thicker here, pressing close. You feel eyes on you, dozens of them. And then, footsteps, slow, heavy, coming down from above. You freeze, the air grows cold. A whisper curls in your ear, too faint to understand. And suddenly the footsteps stop, right above you. When you force yourself to look up, you see nothing but darkness. Yet the overwhelming dread makes it impossible to breathe. It's as if the hotel itself has noticed you. The Baker is more than haunted, it is alive. Some investigators believe the building has absorbed decades of pain and despair, becoming a vessel for something darker than ghosts. They call it a hungry place, a structure that feeds on fear, drawing people inside just to trap them in its endless cycle of terror. And the truth is hard to deny. People come here seeking ghosts, but they leave with more than they bargained for. Scratches, bruises, voices whispering in their dreams long after they've left. Some refuse to speak about what they saw, convinced the Baker is still watching them. Now step back for a moment. 5 haunted places in Texas. The forgotten asylum in Terrell, its screams still echoing through empty wards. The cursed halls of Yorktown Memorial, where shadow people stalk the living. The old San Antonio Hospital, soaked in tragedy. Dallas's old Parkland, with its restless patients and phantom gurneys. And the Baker Hotel, a towering tomb of sorrow and spectacle. Each place is drenched in death. Each holds spirits that refuse to move on. But the Baker is different. The Baker doesn't just hold ghosts. The Baker is the ghost. So I'll leave you with this question. If you stood on the 12th floor of the Baker Hotel at 3 a.m., and the lady in white appeared at the end of the hall, would you run? Or would you follow her into the darkness, knowing you might never come back? Because Texas isn't the end of our journey. It's only the beginning. Next, we travel north, into the haunted hospitals and asylums of Illinois, where even darker stories are waiting. And if you've survived this far, you belong here. Subscribe and step with me into the next haunting.